Welcome to this episode of ProdSec Decoded, podcast where we explore the fascinating intersection of product security and AI. I'm Chiradeep Vittal.
And I'm Pratik Roy Chaudhary. We are your hosts for the show today.
In today's episode, we have the privilege to feature an exceptional leader, innovator in AI and machine learning, Dr. Rajkiran Panuganti. Currently serving as head of GenAI engineering at Krutrim, which is part of Ola Group, Dr. Panuganti has had a remarkable career spanning some of the biggest names in tech, with 14 years with Microsoft, where he led the Microsoft 365 chat team, a stint at Google, and as a co-founder and CTO of AI Technologies Inc. He's also had a bi-weekly newsletter called My Thoughts on LLM, where he talks about the latest trends in the LLM world.
In our conversation today, Dr. Panuganti takes us through the rapidly evolving landscape of AI agents. He offers practical insights on building secure and effective AI systems. And he also shared with us interesting agentic use cases as well as architectural and security consideration for agent developers. Take a listen.
Welcome to the Product Security Podcast. You and I, we have a common alma mater, IIT Bombay. Before we talk about AI and agents, would love to hear about your journey. You have led AI teams at some of the biggest names in tech.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. Really happy and glad to be part of this podcast. So currently I'm Senior Director and Head of Engineering, Ola Krutrim. We build our own foundational models, agentic systems. We are a bit more heavily focused on the Indian consumer market, but we are not restricted to that. It's just that that's our primary focus. We also build multimodal models as well as many scenarios enabling multimodal agentic systems, etc. And of course, as part of that, security is a very important criteria that we consider whenever we are launching a lot of these applications. And these are all new paradigms. So thinking of security layer is completely requires a new thinking. We are a lot more focused on the models, the agentic systems, building applications, etc. Coming to my background, I did my BTech at IIT Bombay, that's for common alma mater. And then I did my PhD and then I had a brief stint at Google. And I had a very, very long journey at Microsoft. Pretty much worked at many products at Microsoft, all layers of Bing, catering to a very, very important problem of search. Primarily, there are only two providers in the market really, like Google and Bing. So that was an exciting journey. And then I built basically a machine learning infrastructure for rapid experimentation and massive data scale experimentations. And then I was part of Cortana. And finally, I was part of the Microsoft Office. And while at Microsoft Office, the OpenAI or the LM revolution happened. And so I was a key member of, and my teams were managing Copilot, the Microsoft Copilot, some of the aspects of the Copilot or some verticals of the Copilot. And that essentially gave me a vision of essentially the kind of revolution that was about to come, which is obvious, fairly obvious right now. But it was an exciting time there, looking at where things are headed.
It certainly sounds exciting. And the last 2 years have been the acceleration has been tremendous. Any other big trends you're seeing in the agentic world right now? Because every week this is a big change, but anything that you're seeing?
First of all, of course, as you rightly said, I think in my entire career, I haven't seen any area evolving so rapidly as this one. So in terms of trends, what we talked today, probably can go out of date within few weeks. Who knows, few days more, right? So coming to trends, yes, absolutely. This year, actually, at the beginning of this year itself, most people were viewing this year as the year of agentic systems, agentic frameworks, whole thing, agents, and agents. Right? So particularly the few trends that are really coming up now is basically things are maturing and there are a lot of focus on interoperability between the agents and tools, agents and systems, agents and existing systems, etc. So one of the primary trend that I see is interoperability. The second trend, I mean, this is a stuff that was existing even last year, but becoming more and more prominent this year is until last year, due to various reasons, a lot of applications were still in a Copilot scenario where the confidence of these agentic systems being autonomous in themselves was not so high. So a lot of things that were coming to production were essentially in a co-pilot where a human is still there in the loop to validate and be confident about the outcome that's coming out of these systems. Now we are seeing more and more of these agentic systems almost ready to operate in a truly autonomous manner for very specific domains, right? Whether it is coding, as we see vibe coding, etc., that's coming up, but even AI employees, where some of the common mundane routine tasks being easily handled by the LLMs and the agentic systems. So that's the primary trend, overall trend that I'm seeing. Other aspect is also that now that this acceleration in this direction, the models that are the model support or the model capabilities that are really needed to support such scenarios is also evolving very rapidly, both in closed source as well as the open source. Cool. And hence we will see many more of these multi-agentic systems. Manus was one of the thing that got attention by quite a lot of people, deep research, etc. It's also in a way not really multi-agent system, but to an extent multi-agent system with operators, etc. So there's a lot of advancement that's happening in these multi-agent systems. Other trend that I also see is more and more integrations into the business operations. So there's a lot of, because now there is increasing confidence on these agentic systems being able to perform these tasks. So there's, I see a trend of a lot of integrations into business operations. The direction that I see trends happening is the emergence in the multimodal capabilities. So diverse data types, whether it's text, images, audio, and even video, right? For example, in medical scenarios, a lot of video related scenarios are present. Audio is of course there. Text and images, and this multimodal is also another direction where it's rapidly evolving. Finally, all of these, as things go more and more towards autonomous and multi-agentic systems, the trust or the security as well as the ethical and the trustworthy AI aspects also need to really evolve. Right now, they are there, but still many of these concerns still exist. It's still a very open-ended problem, not just an open-ended problem. It's the challenges are evolving by the day. So that's another area where I see some of the trends happening.
So, Rajkiran, you talked a lot about AI employees and manners and some of the other use cases. So, speaking about use cases, maybe we would like to hear. I mean, obviously, since ChatGPT came out in November 2022, there has been an explosion in the kinds of use cases. Would like to hear your thoughts on some of the interesting use cases that you have come across, and maybe anything particular in the cybersecurity space that interests you.
Yes, absolutely. So first I'll talk in general, then probably I'll talk about cybersecurity a bit more specifically. So as we all know, one of the first area that was that where the agentic use cases was coming into place in the first place was the customer service automation. That's where there was a lot of focus, a lot of use cases, a lot of startups that have come in, uh, and I would say no, they were fairly successful, or at least moderate level successful, even last year. And this year, the confidence on them is really blowing. And I know many startups with that are in this world. The demand for them is exponentially growing. I mean, they are not even able to cope with the kind of demand and the pace of growth that they are seeing. That's one primary area that was getting disrupted. The second area that I particularly observe some of this disruption happening is IT operations and help desk. The third one that I see is healthcare administration, the non-core medical aspect of it. For example, billing, coding, anything related to insurance, etc. That's another area where um, the personalized recommendations, the coding, there's a lot of human effort that used to be needed to uh, make these things smoother. And of course, they were also having significant monetary impact And hence, this was one of the areas, especially in healthcare, where a lot of these applications happen. Right? And I also see another area that's really interesting is a lot of scientific research. A lot of scientific research is also deploying use cases over here. And this is particularly interesting because, as these agents are able to do and aid the researchers, I don't think they are very far away from doing research by themselves. Humans push technology barriers via research. Now, think of these, and a lot of this pushing is done by, let's say, universities and the PhD graduates, etc. And if these agents are able to match and be better than those PhD level candidates, you can sense what direction it's heading. In fact, even in the benchmarks, right? Benchmarks. I remember when GP 3.5 thing came out, uh, the comparison was with a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, to some extent, of course, GRE, SAT, etc. The next versions when they came in, now you're not comparing no longer with the elementary school kid. You're now comparing with at least a high schooler, but more so with a SAT and GRE level exams. And the next version I see now you're comparing with graduates. Right? Graduates are usually the after graduation or after bachelor's is where a huge majority of the people stop their education. Right? These models are already there at that level competing with them. And now they are going to the next frontier of actually competing with the PhD graduates and so on, right? In fact, we be better than them. Frankly, I'm a PhD myself, and some of the problems benchmarks that we are targeting, I myself not solve it at least easily. Uh, and even the area that I'm working on need a humongous amount of effort and thinking for me to solve. These models are already doing maybe equal to me, better than me, for sure. So it's a very interesting direction things are heading. Now, coming to the cybersecurity space, this space is also being hugely revolutionized by these agentic AI systems. Few of the common areas are the automated threat detection and response, right? So, so I think firms like Microsoft, CrowdStrike, etc., they have integrated agentic AI into their platforms. I think the Microsoft Security Copilot is hugely popular to autonomous triage, like phishing attempts, prioritizing of the critical incidents, etc. In fact, it also has a even in a Copilot scenario, it has a very important impact on humans who are in that domain because in that scenario, a lot of these threads or phishing attempts, etc. There's so many of them that you tend to ignore, right? You have really tried to go and select the important one. And as a human, what happens is once if you are having to pick like one or two important ones out of 100, you might also even miss those important ones because it becomes a tendency to probably ignore, not think of it as a similar, not so threatening attack. Whereas now that effective filter happens even in a Copilot scenario, right? Then I would say there's a lot more attention that's paid by humans who are actually triaging these. The other area that is really emerging in the cybersecurity framework is as these agentic systems evolve, the SaaS layer, right? The SaaS layer is getting hugely disrupted and being replaced. Right? Huge when that's happening, and then obviously the SaaS security and monitoring also changes because most of the existing paradigm on cybersecurity is built for this scenario, for the scenario of SaaS. A lot of it, I would say, not all. A lot of it is focused on this asset. And when that itself is getting disrupted, obviously you need to look at the challenges that it brings in, the newer ways of things, newer ways of attacks, newer ways of threats that are going to come in such a system. Another aspect, it's not very different from the traditional one, but the cause and effect is different here. Vibe coding is getting popular. Now, when vibe coding is getting popular, you are essentially democratizing who can build applications. And when you're democratizing who can build applications, you need to look into these specific details. Right? And you need to pay attention. And I see most of the vibe coders essentially pay attention to the functionality. When they pay attention to the functionality, obviously a lot of these details are not being paid attention to. And when that happens, they will discover these issues only when it actually hits them. Right? I know my friends who are hosting some educational institutes, very big, very well reputed educational institutes. They were just focusing on their functionality. I mean, I'm not talking about vibe coding here. They had their own websites, etc. But their focus has been their functionality. And all of a sudden, they, at least they suspect that one of their competitor had a cybersecurity attack on their stuff, right? And that brought and that had a huge impact on their reputation as well as operability for many days.
Yeah, and we'll come back to vibe coding. Clearly, the focus this year. I mean, vibe coding was invented by, or the term was just invented in, I think, the third week of February by Andre Karpathy, and it's already become so wild. So definitely something to keep our eyes on. But let's shift gears and talk about building these agents. Right? What are some of the key considerations that developers should keep in mind when creating agents? You already talked about, hey, just don't throw code out there and be mindful about the security.
Yes.
Anything else that they should be thinking about?
Yeah. I think if I look at the advice that I give to my own team, particularly here, because we are actively building a lot of these agent systems. wha- wha- One of it is being practical. We are in a scenario where things are evolving rapidly. So if you are restricting yourself to one particular framework and binding yourself to one particular framework, uh, then a new one comes up that is rapidly, I mean, massively, significantly better, and you're not in a position to easily adopt. Sometimes you need to be there to get that quality because it's an emerging scenario. So modularity and layered approaches is absolutely very, very important. Is in the current market, current pace at which
Yeah,
things are.
because who knows which component you'll have to swap out because something better comes along.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Who knows?
Do you find developers worrying about things like CALs, fine tuning, and hallucination? These are all topics which ML researchers tend to go on and on about. But like you said, developers are like, I just need to put the product out there.
Yes. So you talked about three different things in the context of developers: evals,
Hallucinations, and then fine tuning, and
fine. So evals, fine tuning. Let me address these three differently because when a product is built, it's not just the developers. The whole company is looking at. So there are different players who are focusing on these aspects in different. So hallucinations, yes, developers pay attention to it, but a lot more attention is paid to hallucination by product CIOs, executives, etc. Because that's where reputation and things of that nature or the impact of it is there. Where developers may not always give as much as attention to it as needed, but executives pay a lot more attention to these aspects. Frankly, in last year, I know so many projects where they just got killed because the executives were not getting enough confidence that products don't have such, or at least give out something that's not backed by something. So that was one of the actual major killer of the agentic AI systems. Now coming to fine tuning, fine tuning is still seen by the experts in the area. Yes, you might have fine tuning interfaces and get a fine tuned model. How to iterate on it still requires some domain knowledge. What I see is there's some buzz, but a overwhelming majority of the developers as well as the companies are not investing much effort in that fine tuning. Another reason is also that, yeah, now you go and fine tune one model. By the time the cycle of fine tuning and integration system is over, new model comes up and that might be better than your fine tuned model.
Yeah.
So that's another reason. Evals. Actually, this is one area that I have the biggest growth. People don't the importance of evals as much as they should. Especially, let me take the simple prompt engineer. At the look of it, most people, especially tech tech guys as well as non-tech guys, view it as something like an instruction that I can write in like 5 minutes. Right? So if I have to change and add one more line or clarify the instruction and it should work, why is this such a big task? Where the traditional training of machine learning really comes into picture, that what we need to realize what we can impact in what are we, and have your set that's representative and to evaluate it properly. So, especially even in this scenario, people who are doing evals, as they address one bug after the other, and after the prompt keeps getting exploded. And then when you take a step back and do a proper fresh eval, now you get a very different result, because each increment you are just focusing on the problem and you are not focusing on the, and hence when it comes to production applications, and this is frankly one of the biggest flaws I have on how people approach. People think it's a tiny. And nowadays, people think, okay, I can ask ChatGPT to give me the prompt and just put it there. Yes, it works. It works fairly well, but you can't
What are
implement.
the edge cases? And I think the most recent buzz, of course, recent being 4 weeks, which was ancient history. Things like MCP and A2A, how agents talk to each other. Is that something we should worry about at all, or you
Oh
pay
yeah,
attention to? Something else will come along.
oh no, absolutely. Frankly, in the trends I was talking about, when it comes to multi-agent systems and integrations, this is an essential, right? So primarily the MCP and A2A, these were supposed to come more than a year ago. We were all waiting for players to lay out this protocol. Let's say like some not so prominent lays out the protocol. Adoption is very important. And I think essentially laying down that layer, because they have been one of the most successful ones in coding, building applications, etc. So Anthropic coming up with MCP, and thankfully other players like OpenAI adopting it, and Google, etc. Everyone adopting that is actually a huge thing. This layer is very important. Having said that, I still see MCP is very insufficient. It, as rightly says, it's a model context protocol. So it's about how you provide context, the model. But then people who are, so let's say I'm integrating with some service A, and the service A needs to have that tools in such a way that the agent can really understand it well without having to read through its documentation. It's not done in that a smooth fashion by most of these MCP servers. So it's in an early stage. I would still say it's in an early stage, because MCP just connects that interoperability. Additionally, you need to have some of the good standards that lays out what makes a good communication. It's not just sufficient to say you can communicate. It's you need to establish what makes good communication. MCP is all about giving context to the model, but the communication between agents is much beyond that. Addresses tool to model communication to an extent. But let's say I want to present some widgets. I want to communicate with two agents, right? MCP is not sufficient. Good start. It's a good start, or there can be multiple layers on top of it. Agent to agent communication is again a protocol that's coming up, where it allows agents to collaborate, share knowledge, and divide tasks, etc. So, frankly, it's a very good one. Having said that, in my view, agent to agent is also not yet sufficient, because still they are focused on this uh, text-based communication, and communication needs to evolve to be richer. And looking forward to more protocols emerging, or at least these protocols emerging in that direction to bridge those gaps. Frankly, I see these protocols similar to value that the HTTP has brought. Sites had their own content. Now, how do you communicate with the HTTP being that communication protocol enabled that massive explosion? And of course, the search came into picture, which connected many businesses to many consumers. So I see things evolving in the same direction where each human will have their own personal AI assistant, and or each business can have their single or multiple assistants. And these assistants or agents talk to each other, collectively accomplish a task or negotiate, etc.
So maybe switching gears a little bit and going back to the intersection of model selection and security. Security is obviously a huge concern and a hot topic for our audience. So from a security perspective, how should developers think about what models to select? And especially, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the non-US models like DeepSeek and others coming in from purely from a security perspective. That would be great to hear.
Yes, absolutely. So, first, staying on the previous topic from the cybersecurity point of view, right? Now, if the communication layers are changed, right, the security paradigm is also changed. So, uh, whatever you established earlier as your way to address all the security issues has completely changed. Protocols, frankly, haven't paid much attention, whether it's MCP, agent to agent. They haven't paid much attention. That's why there is MCP guard or things of that nature slowly starting to emerge. But frankly, the security aspects are unfortunately almost nearly ignored in these protocols, I would say, to an extent. Maybe that's a very strong statement, but yes, they are nearly ignored. So there's a lot of scope, and not just scope, but it's a challenge that people have to take up, and probably I am hoping newer and newer, etc., come and address those things, right, from security point of view. Now, coming to the other question that you asked about model selection, particularly with non-US models, I think people are referring to here, DeepSeek models, etc. So, I when I talk to people who are especially from the non-core technical, actually, I think there is a lot of misinformation that if I use a Chinese model and the data goes to China, even if it's open source, there's a lot of misinformation, especially when it comes to model selection. The model selection as such does not impact your security in a direct way. Of course, it can make things loose, etc., etc. But in a direct way, it doesn't get impact. But where that model is hosted and who is the provider, that's where you need to pay attention. So DeepSeek, the company offers DeepSeek model, let's say at a very cheap price. And of course, you are choosing that as a provider. Then you are sending your data there. Similarly, if you use AI or any of these closed source ones, the problem with the closed source, especially from the security scenarios, now if they are closed source, then you are sending data over there. And they are the only provider for most part for that closed source models, right? So unless you have some guarantees like Azure does on OpenAI, from security point of view, from your data premise aspects, you are sending your data over. If this is really critical, either you need to choose your provider or you be your own provider and host those models. It doesn't matter whether it's a US model or non-US model in terms of security or privacy of the data. It's the provider that you choose that matters. Where you host it, where you send your data, etc. Unfortunately, or for whatever reasons, I saw when I talked to a lot of executives, there is a misconception that using a Chinese model means the data goes to China. It doesn't. It's a model. Bunch of matrix multiplications happen on computer.
Makes sense. And yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Rajkiran. So staying on the course of security, maybe we go back to the vibe coding aspect that we were talking about earlier. there is a huge amount of code that is being developed because of vibe coding, right? So maybe if you would highlight a little bit on the security implications of so much code that is being generated, and obviously these are trained on open source code, etc. Maybe would like to hear your thoughts on how vibe coding is going to impact security. I think you touched upon it earlier a little bit. Would love for you to elaborate on it.
So vibe coding is, as I said, like started a few months ago, or maybe many months ago, as more fun, fast, and a easy way to ship to prod, right? But then what it also means that you're shipping to prod without tests, reviews, all of the processes established by this domain in the past, almost 2.5 decades, are bypassed. And these agents are writing code, they are querying databases, they are making modifications to databases, they are making decisions. And in such scenario, when you obfuscate out all of these layers, then security becomes an afterthought, right? You need sandboxing, permissions, you need runtime monitoring. It's essentially, otherwise it's like you're letting a intern have all kinds of permissions in the company and letting them go wild. In fact, even when it comes to, I mean, mildly digressing, even beyond vibe coding, when it comes to the MCP, etc., the auth tokens and security are not really part of those protocols. And more so when vibe coding is even obfuscating even beyond that, right? Security is almost ignored or it's an afterthought completely, right? So, uh, I mean, I don't know. The it's still a, I would say vibe coding is still a fun way kind of showing the promise. But if you are someone serious, taking your applications to prod, you can't just be vibe coding your way if security and all aspects are really important for you.
Yeah. So, Rajkiran, as we wrap up, I would like to hear your thoughts on how you see the future of the agentic world evolving. Where do you see we are headed in the next few years? I think one of the things that Chiradeep and I are talking about is, should kids pursue a CS degree or PhDs in computer science anymore? So, would like to just hear your thoughts on how we are seeing the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing that we can predict about the future in this world is saying that it's so hard to predict, right? So earlier future used to mean years. Now future means months. So my predictions are probably valid for months, right? So future of agentic world evolving. I think the agentic system will evolve as another layer of operating system, maybe kind of a personal operating system. There's always kind of a layer that will form, which is a general purpose computer. You can take LLM as the chip or the processor, like Intel Core, etc. But this agentic system essentially would be evolving like a operating systems on which that becomes a platform on which a lot of these agents will be like a Play Store apps that you select and that you would like to use them, and then they communicate between each other, unlike the App Store where one app doesn't communicate with other, right? So I don't want to really make an analogy with the Play Store kind of thing, but it's an apps, but they are also communicating with each other, right? So that's the direction it's heading. More autonomous systems are going to be a reality. A lot of replacement of mundane human tasks and a lot of personal assistant scenarios happening is what I see very soon in the future. Other direction that I see is verticals going deep into one vertical and disrupting the whole vertical is what I would see. Coming to the future of education, kids education, etc. Should they pursue this? Absolutely. The degrees that you are trying to get educated on is not going to change. It's the content, of course, is going to change. No one learns assembly level language. Nowadays, I should say kids. Kids are not learning C, C++ at all. Maybe not even object-oriented programming that I see. It's Python that people are learning. And very soon when vibe coding takes off, we might even see people not learning Python, etc. So is it needed? Just as every generation definitely layer things, the fundamentals as what was the topmost layer for our previous generation, I think the same thing is going to happen. Like instruction level assembly, C++ were foundations for us. Now no one learns. Right? Similarly, Python, all of these protocols, APIs, etc. There's going to be that layer for the next generation. They will learn. They will think those are the fundamentals. And people should still stay in this direction because, as you're saying, evals, the thought process, etc. They're all still very relevant. It's just that what are you leveraging when you're evaluating these are the SVM models and decision trees, etc. to a deep learning model. Now these LLM models and prompts, but the thought process is still in the same direction.
Awesome. I think what you said resonates. We are also furiously building agents. A lot of what you said with MCP really resonates. And I would say that as far as computer science goes, you have to know one layer below. Even if you're coding, you have to understand how that code is running on the CPU, on the hardware, on the disk, and so on. If you're working on the OS and hardware, and you need to understand how distributed systems work. Some things you still need to know. I hope they continue teaching these things.
I hope the curriculum adapts to this rapid pace of evolving. In our time, the curriculum, one course used to change in few years, right? Now it's not just one course that has to change in few years. The whole curriculum has to look at it, different.
Yeah. This was great, Rajkiran. Thank you for sharing your insights. I expected very well and detailed answers to our questions. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us on ProdSec Decoded. If you found value in today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with our colleagues. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the evolving world of product security. Until next time, stay secure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. Absolutely enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Rajkiran.
Thank you.